fixed routes. We have a paratransit service and also a senior van shuttle service. Being in Missoula, we're at about 3,500 feet elevation, and so we experience extremes of both temperatures. We get down into negative temperatures in the winter and up into the high 90s into the hundreds in the summer. So we have a ranging climate that we are operating electric buses in. Next slide. Right now, our fleet, we have 30 coaches in our fleet, are from 29 to 35 feet in length, and mostly Gilligs. We have some Eldorados, and our newest ones are Proterras. We also have 12 paratransit vehicles in service, and then our service vehicles. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Vince Christo. He's our project and planning manager here, and he is our guru of electric buses.
Great, thanks, Corey. So Missoula is a wonderful and beautiful place, but many people are surprised to find out, even folks who move here, that the air quality overall in Missoula is actually quite bad compared to cities around the country. It's a combination of what you see here in the picture, something called winter inversions, which trap cold air down in the valley and also trap pollutants for the duration of the inversion. And also summer wildfires, which have become more and more frequent and intense in years. So those two things lead to really poor air quality in the Missoula Valley. It's much better than it was 30 years ago. In the early 90s, we instituted measures to eliminate, for example, wood-fired stoves, which is another surprise for a lot of folks who come to the west here in Montana. But nonetheless, we work hard in the community on air quality, and it's been an important thing in the transportation sector for a long time. So our board of directors, way back in 2014, passed a clean fuel path resolution asking our staff to come up with a plan for moving away from diesel vehicles. And after that time, staff worked hard to develop applications to the Low-No FTA program, among other things, and work with vendors to understand the market for electric vehicles and other zero emission vehicles. And we applied at least three times while I have been with the organization, perhaps one or two more times before we actually won a Low-No award back in 2017. A few months later, we won a much larger award from the Bus and Bus Facilities Program, also for electric buses. We made the decision here at that time that it was time for our agency to move towards electric buses. So we used the standard Bus and Bus Facilities Program to apply for electric bus replacements of diesels. And so we had a big year in 2018 with 2 grants coming in, and in total funding for, can you go to the next slide? Funding for 6 battery electric buses. So we wound up purchasing 6 Proterra battery electric buses, 440 kilowatt hour battery size, in addition to 7 chargers, so 1 for each bus and an additional one for our maintenance shop. And they were delivered in the summer of 2019 and began service in August of that year. Next slide. So it's been quite a journey since that time, and I'm going to talk in the next few slides about some of the successes that we've had, which I think have been many, and also some of the challenges that we've had. Next slide. So I think one of the things we did really well was we made a big deal out of this. A few months prior to delivery, we had an announcement event in which we had board members and community leaders announce the forthcoming delivery of electric buses and talk about the goals of our community and how Mountain Line is helping us reach those goals and become the better community that we all want to see. That generated enthusiasm, I think, for the project. And then a few days, really, maybe less than a week after delivery, we had a kickoff event, a ride around with community leaders that are shown here in the picture, Brian von Lossberg, our city council president. And that was also successful. It got some really nice press. We had some, it was really nice to have our leaders be able to actually see the bus and ride on the bus and feel the bus. And you could tell that the community understood on the whole what was going on. They knew to a large degree that Mountain Line was getting electric buses and that it was going to be something that was really positive for our community. So as evidence of that, I included a clip here of an advertisement from a local taco shop here in Missoula. They may be in other locations as well. But Taco John's wanted to put up an advertisement showing that they supported our electric buses. We also had a request from one of city council members after the ride around to wondering if we could somehow find a way to indicate on our mobile app which of the buses were electric buses so that her kids and other kids could find the electric bus and ride on it. And we were actually able to do that. So we made a big deal about this. I think, depending on your community, there may be more or less things going on in the news cycle, but we found the response, I think, was much greater than we had anticipated, and I would expect that factor would be consistent in other places. Next slide. So another thing I think we did well was planning from the start for the delivery of our buses. I think all of us here at Mountain Line were motivated by a healthy fear of having buses delivered without a way to charge them. And so I've shown here kind of a timeline of sorts that shows the four main components that we broke this project down into. And they're all different colors because we looked at them as independent procurements. So first of all, the bus procurement and build, we worked with Proterra. We did include Proterra in our low-no grant application. So we had a competition waiver that allowed us to not have to go through a solicitation process, but the bus build, it took longer than we thought it would, mostly because we'd never purchased a bus from Proterra before. I think if we purchase buses from them again in the future, it'll go a lot smoother, but and a lot quicker. But it took a while. We also purchased our charging equipment from Proterra, but we did organize it as a separate procurement for procurement from a procurement standpoint. Designing the facility improvements was something we did with a local engineering firm. They drew up engineering plans to determine what equipment and we needed at our facility. And we worked with a local electrical contractor to actually build the electrical upgrades as well as install the charging equipment once it was delivered to us. And that we left a little bit of window there, a gap between having our facility construction completed and our bus delivery. We were intending to have at least 3 or 4 weeks between those times. And we pretty much got there. The whole process took about 21 months. It was a little bit complicated by the fact that we received the second grant shortly after the first grant, so we had to adjust our bus purchase accordingly. One thing I'll note here is that the arrows in this diagram, they indicate things that need to happen before the next phase can begin. So, for example, we realized that we needed to actually choose and decide what exactly our charging equipment was going to be before our electrical engineer could begin designing the improvements around that specific piece of equipment. Likewise, the designs had to be completed before the construction process could begin. So I think it's really helpful to kind of look at the big picture before you get started so that you can meet your timelines, and that's what we're able to do. So next slide. Another thing I think we did well, and really kind of thanks to one of our board members who's very active in the climate and solar energy fields, was work really closely with partners across our community and across our state. The project that we were involved in through this board member was called the Solar Energy Innovation Network. And this is a program that's run by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It brings together teams of stakeholders from across the country, including utilities, state and local governments, innovative companies, nonprofits, and electric utilities. And they work together, teams work together to develop innovative applications of solar and distributed energy resources in their own communities. And so the Montana team, which was made up of several cities, our investor-owned utility, the Department of Environmental Quality, and Mountain Line, they chose, before Mountain Line got involved, they chose to actually focus on electrification of transit as their project. And of the 8 or 9 teams around the country, there was actually another team that chose the same topic and looked at a slightly different set of problems. Next slide. Or actually, go back, please. The process was pretty helpful in a lot of ways. It was very detailed and technical oriented, that they helped us look at things. Probably the most useful thing we got out of it was this slide right here, which helped us, they helped us actually understand and estimate the emissions reductions for different pollutants, which is something that a lot of folks are interested in. And so what we found, which was really surprising, was that because of the high amount of coal in the energy production mix here in Western Montana, that actually sulfur dioxide pollution was expected to go up as a result of battery electric buses. But of course, carbon dioxide and nitrous oxides were expected to go down. Next slide. It also helped us understand load patterns and demand charges that we could expect to see. This is all before our buses were delivered. Next slide. And of course, the solar component of the project was that they helped us analyze whether or not it would make sense from a business perspective for Mountain Line to invest in some kind of battery storage system that would allow us to reduce our peak demand charges. And what we found was that at today's current prices for battery storage, it wouldn't really make sense. But if prices for battery storage ever went down in the future and demand charges stayed high, it might actually make sense. So all these things were interesting and important, but really the real benefit here for us, the sort of unexpected benefit, was really the connections that we built with people and stakeholders across the state in the energy sector. And that has opened the door for us to work with our investor-owned utility and Department of Environmental Quality on a transit-specific rate case, which we'll talk about later. So next slide. We've also been monitoring the performance of our buses and our energy usage from day one. Our utility was not willing to start a new service for our electric buses, which would have been our preference, to have the bus service separate from our building. So instead, we installed what are called smart meters on each of our chargers as well as on our building, so that we could differentiate and track precisely the energy that was used by each charger. We also had a few other data sources we look at. We created a form that our operations team uses to track the availability and maintenance issues and operational issues over time, which was important in the beginning of the deployment. Proterra has their own system for tracking charging and bus performance. And of course, we have our energy bills. So I included a graphic here to show that we just have really detailed data that we've been able to use to differentiate what we're doing. So next slide. So some of the challenges that we have faced. Next slide. So of course, the electric buses, there's operational differences that we've had to adjust to. So first of all, they add complexity to our bus barn because they have to be parked at specific locations in order to be charged. The chargers have to be physically put into each of the buses and taken out before the buses can be moved. So there's more of a dance than usual in our barn dealing with the electric buses. And of course, the efficiency of our buses fluctuates up to 50%, and that's depending on weather. And so using our data collection in the beginning, we were able to come up with a plan in those first late summer, early fall months to deal with the cold weather conditions that we were expecting. And so the plan we came up with was to create a whole new blocking schedule for the winter months, which involved midday charging as well as preconditioning the cabins in the mornings. And so that worked for us last winter. We didn't have problems with buses losing power out on the road, but of course we had to do a whole new blocking schedule and unpick, and it added a lot of complexity to our operation. Next slide. We can go to the next slide. The other challenge is that it costs more to run these electric buses. We don't have smart chargers. They weren't available at the time. Chargers that could fluctuate the amount of energy they used, basically dampen the peak amount of energy that you use, so you could reduce your costs. And so not having smart charging basically means that you're going to pay high demand charges. And so the graph here shows that since our deployment, about 50% of the cost of energy for our electric buses has gone to demand charges. Next slide. And so on the whole, the unit cost of energy that we pay to power our buses is about twice the cost of the energy we pay to power our building. Next slide. And on a cost per mile basis compared to our diesel buses, the electric buses are running significantly higher at around 70 cents per mile compared to about 40 cents per mile for diesel. So of course, diesel has been historically low for us and probably all of you as well recently. But what is encouraging about this is that, I guess in our discussions with our investor-owned utility, they think that they can make the case to eliminate our demand charges overnight. And since demand charges make up about 50% of our cost, that's something that would bring our energy cost for the electric buses at or below diesel, even at the current low prices. Next slide. I'll let Corey finish us off here.
Hey, thanks, Vince. So our board of directors adopted a zero tailpipe emissions resolution in February of this year. And the goal is that we will be completely remove all tailpipe emissions by 2035. We were fortunate to receive a grant award from the Department of Environmental Quality with the Volkswagen mitigation funds, which allowed us to purchase 2 buses, which we have on order. They will be Gilligs coming in, and right on the heels of that, we were awarded another Low-No grant, which has allowed us to purchase 4 additional buses, which we will soon be placing an order with. And once we have those in, our fleet will be about 40% electric. And as Vince said, we have this transit-specific case that Northwest Energy is working on with us, which would be a game changer as far as costs go for us. But they've been highly successful, very popular in the community. We just did a voter phone survey for a different reason, and one of the questions was about electric buses, and it pulled very, very high. In our community, people are excited about electric buses and what they can do. So even with their challenges, for us, it's been a positive experience. Next slide.
All right, thank you so much, Corey and Vince. That was awesome. So now we are gonna jump over to Rich DeRock in Link Transit, and I'm just gonna get my screen up here. Just 1 second. Okay. All right, Rich, are you ready to go? I think you are muted. There we go.
Okay. So good morning, afternoon, I guess, depending where we're at, everybody. So I've titled this The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And the good news is the good has gotten a lot better than it has been in the past. There's still some interesting challenges with electric buses. Just go ahead and move to the next slide. This map, just to give you a sense of where we are in Washington State, we are all of Chelan County and the western part of Douglas counties, which is on the east side of the Cascades. We actually have the largest service area in the state, but most of our service is actually along the Wenatchee and Columbia rivers, which is in canyons going forward, and that's where the electric buses operate. Go ahead and move to the next slide. Our population is about 120,000 in our service area, about 50,000, closer to 80,000 of that's in the Wenatchee urban area, and then we have a couple of outlying communities that have the rest of the population going forward. We have 62 buses in our fleet, about 2.2 million annual miles, so we have a lot of long distance routes, about 1.1 million boardings pre-COVID, about half of that right now. Go on. We've been in electric buses for a long time. We started, first electric buses we put into operation was in 2010, which was a rapid charge, opportunity charge system. We added BYD coaches in 2016, which were a plug-in charge. In 2017, we brought wireless charging to our BYD coaches, an additional bus there, which was really interesting. And then we have just implemented, well, the last 4 months, 10 2020 model BYDs, which are wirelessly charged, and substantial improvements moving forward. So our 2010 buses were a 22-foot trolley-style vehicle, which were hugely problematic in a lot of ways. In fact, we changed battery technologies 3 times on these vehicles over their life. They have been retired. We transferred the vehicles actually to Chattanooga, which had a similar vehicle, and they're continuing to run them there. And our chargers were decommissioned about a year ago now for these vehicles. Move to the next slide. This was the robotic charger that would fast charge these vehicles. We could charge them at about 350 kilowatts of power, which meant we could recharge the entire original battery in about 4 minutes. With these, they actually met our design standards, but because we were charging every single time the bus came in, about every 30 minutes, that meant we were using those chargers 44 times a day, and they were failing about once a day because of that, which is a 95% reliability rate, which is what we expect from the manufacturer. But having it fail once a day was a huge challenge for us moving forward, and came to the conclusion that was just a fundamental problem with conductive charging, trying to do it that often during the course of the day. The next slide. So this is our 2016 BYD coaches, the K9s. These are 35-footers. These are 270 kilowatt. We had lots of build quality problems with these first vehicles, but we worked through them, and they were actually quite effective for us. And we've run them for, well, since 2016 now, and ended up by the time we sent them back to BYD, which was part of our deal going forward, which was a month ago now, they were the most reliable buses in our fleet, and operating cost less than half of what we were seeing elsewhere. These were our plug-in vehicles. They had a maximum range on a plug-in charge of about 135 miles, giving you enough to get back to the yard and so forth. So we did midday charging as well as plug-in charging to make those work. Next slide. So these are our plug-in chargers. We have them at our base. There's 1 charger per vehicle at the operating base, and then we had a couple of stand chargers in our downtown location where we could charge them midday, so they could to extend the range past 135 miles those vehicles operated. Actually, they worked quite well once you figured things out, but as was mentioned, you had to deal with changing blocks, being able to give enough time to charge them in a plug-in mode. The BYD chargers is 85 kilowatts, so it's relatively fast even on the slow charger, but still takes 2.5 hours to fully charge a 270 kilowatt bus. Next slide. This is our wireless charger. We contract with Momentum Dynamics, and we have this is a 200 kilowatt wireless charger, which has been absolutely trouble-free for us. It's worked perfectly. And on this, the BYD bus pulls over the charger, and You can kind of see there's 4 pads that are located in the middle of the slide. If you look at the blue area, there's little darker spots. Those are the wireless transmitters, and the bus lines up. He lines his door up with that wheelchair symbol on the curb, and if it gets that, aligns the charger so that the vehicle starts charging when it pulls over. When they kneel the bus to let people off, it starts charging and charges until they take the kneeling off to take off. The start is almost instantaneous in terms of the charge, which actually was hugely beneficial, because one of the things we found with conductive charge was it took about 45 seconds to a minute to engage your conductive charge, where the wireless charges immediately, so you can actually charge this bus between runs effectively. Charging at 200 kilowatts on this vehicle means we can add about 12 miles of range every time we charge it. So if I charge those 2016 buses we were charging this way, we could add enough range by charging once every 2 hours to get about 240 miles out of the vehicle, which allowed it to run any of our urban routes. And this charger has been extraordinarily effective for us. Like I said, we've operated it since 2017, and we've not had a single failure other than the utility having a blew a fuse on its side of the circuit one time. But it's been trouble-free and really supportive of this technology. Moving on, next slide, please. So the good, batteries have gotten hugely better and today are pretty amazing. Reliability started off really, really bad 10 years ago, to the point now that our electric buses are the most reliable thing we have in the fleet. We put into service our new BYDs. They were delivered in February and March during the COVID situation, and we haven't got them into service with less than 2 weeks and have not had a single failure in service. Well, we had one failure on 10 buses since we put them into service, and they're operating daily, which is better than we get with our diesel vehicles. The cost has actually worked quite well, and I'll go through more detail on that. Range has gotten a whole lot better, to the point these actually can work. They're not the niche vehicles they started off with. And charging technology, the wireless charging, really has been quite effective. Let's move on. Next slide, sorry. This graph shows how the batteries improved since we started in 2010. Our 2010 vehicles had 27 kilowatts of power on board the bus. 2014 model buses had 97 kilowatts of power, and that was the repowering of our first generation bus. Our 2016 BYDs started out, the first version we had was 225 kilowatts. Those were replaced with 270 kilowatt buses in 17, and then our 2020 vehicles are 393 kilowatts of power on the vehicle. Now, what's important about this is these vehicles all have exactly the same number of batteries. The batteries have gotten that much better in the 10-year period. So the energy density has gotten hugely better. And the other thing that about this is the batteries have gotten smaller. So the weight of the batteries has gotten less over the 10-year period, while the energy density has gone up dramatically on what's out there. So this is a huge change, and that difference in range is pretty astounding. Next slide, please. For us, these are our most reliable buses. They're currently costing us 26 cents a mile, full cost, maintenance and energy, compared to about 65 cents a mile for our diesel vehicles. In a plug-in mode, they have 175 mile to 200 mile range, depending on the temperature outside. 175 is when it's either very cold or very hot. You still have some impacts with temperature out there, although our 2020 buses have temperature managed batteries. They actually have a cooling system and a heating system on the battery, so they can operate below 32 degrees without any loss of range, and they have a cooling system to allow us to fast charge them when it's over 90 degrees outside. The range does dip a bit because the cooling system takes energy to keep the batteries cool when it's hot, and it takes energy to heat them when it's cold outside. So that does reduce the range a bit, which is why you have that 25-mile difference, and that's temperature related. Wireless charging allows us to take these buses charging once every 2 to 3 hours to over 350-mile range. They can do any route in our system, including our 70-mile one-way routes. on an all-day basis. So it's that wireless charging has converted these from a niche bus to something that can really serve in a really broad fashion. And that's a pretty amazing change from where we started on electric vehicles. Next slide. So on an energy cost basis, now we have really cheap electricity in Wenatchee. We have, I think, the cheapest electricity in the United States right now. For us, our energy cost, lifetime electric cost for these vehicles will be $58,000 as opposed to the $287,000 we estimate for diesel fuel, which means we save about $228,000 in energy costs over the life of the bus. Now the bus does cost $290,000 more than the diesel version of it. So on energy, you don't save enough to make up the difference in cost. Next slide, please. Electric buses have also been talked about as having enormous maintenance savings. And while they do have some, they are cheaper. There are other maintenance costs that come into it. But our lifetime cost right now, and these buses are fairly early, so this number might come down, is 26 cents a mile energy and maintenance cost on the vehicle, which ends up with the savings over what we have for our diesel vehicles, about $253,000, still less than the additional cost of the bus. So it's not a direct replacement. If you're doing a purely economic argument, it still makes sense to buy a diesel bus. But the limitations that we've seen in the past on electric vehicles really have shifted to where if you're looking for any environmental benefit here, you're not looking at having to pay 2 and 3 times the cost, as long as you can deal with your demand charge issue, which has just been talked about. The bad. Right now, every manufacturer has a different charging technology and they're not interchangeable. And that is a huge problem, even though everyone certifies their charging meets the international standards. Those standards are not compatible with each other. So if you buy a Gillig, you have to have a Gillig charger. If you buy a BYD, you have to have a BYD charger. If you buy a Proterra, you have to have a Proterra charger, and they're not interchangeable. The wireless charging technically is interchangeable. Momentum says they can work with anybody, but I'm only aware of them working on BYDs currently. We're getting the first 350 kilowatt chargers right now. We had the first 200s. There are 8 or 9 more installed around the country right now. So they can work on other manufacturers, and we've been told that other manufacturers are working with Momentum to make them available. But that right now is a problem. And it's a big problem in terms of federal grants, because the feds say you need to take a low bid, and you can end up with different charging technologies when you buy the bus, and the charging infrastructure is expensive. Component suppliers. Having been in this business for 10 years, I can tell you that many of the parts that are in electric vehicles are made by one-off companies that don't tend to stick around. Part of the reason we had to retire our 2010 vehicles early was that we couldn't get parts for them anymore. The primary computer was no longer manufactured, and it was technology. It was going to cost us more to re-engineer the bus to put a modern computer in it than it made sense to save. So we had to retire them early. And that was not unique on the computer. We've seen that even with our BYDs, that some of the parts that are used are evolving so fast, it's hard to keep supply. And that's a real challenge going forward. Demand charges. We have a 50% demand charge, but our utility rates are so low here. Our base rate is 2.4 cents a kilowatt. Our demand charge raises to 4.9 cents a kilowatt, which is still a third of what the average in the United States is. We do practice demand management with our chargers. The BYD charger is a smart charger, and you can set the timing and deal with demand, and we've been able to reduce our demand charges. But we also found by going to scale, we actually eliminated most of the demand charge issue, because the demand charge is a flat fee based on your peak usage. And if you're amortizing that cost over a larger fleet, it brings the price down a lot. And as we've gone to 10 vehicles in service, our demand charges have become a pretty small percentage of the energy cost, where when we were operating one vehicle, they were pretty high. And then FTA is a problem, because FTA does not treat electric vehicles as new technology. They treat it as a proven design. And so they expect you're going to have at least 12 years of life out of it. You're going to get disposal, that there's a value to it, and all those questions that we deal with is a real challenge. We've been trying to work with FTA to recognize we are still dealing with the cutting edge technology that is different, and they have to address those issues. And so that's a problem going forward. Next slide, please. Talk about demand charges. It kind of depends where things are. There are ways of addressing it. We did look into battery storage as well. Certainly didn't make sense in our case with the energy costs here. Utility capacity. This is a much bigger issue than I think people have understood. We have or will have 3 wireless chargers at our transit base, which has 16 buses coming into it. Our utility cannot power more than 3 chargers at the same time. They've told us if we go to more than 3, that'll cause the lights to dim in downtown. My operating base, the cost to go beyond 25 vehicles chargers at our operating base was going to be about a $14 million substation upgrade, because the substation couldn't handle more than that going forward. And those challenges you'll find at almost any location as you start to go to scale. The amount of power that is used at the same time can really cause problems with capacity. And then unstable component suppliers, we talked about that as well. So let's move on to the next one. Talked about demand charges already, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but what we've seen was when we were operating 1 vehicle, our peak demand charge rose our price from as low as 2.4 cents a kilowatt to $2.40 a kilowatt. Now, as we've gotten to scale and as we've gotten to consistent operations, what we've found is that our average price is about 4.6 cents a kilowatt, including demand charges today. But we have seen those demand charges really high when you're operating 1 vehicle or a charger goes down, because it's a flat fee that's a charge for the month. When you amortize it over a low volume, you can make it very expensive. So this is a real question of managing your vehicles, for example. When you put them into service, do you put them in for your full billing period on your bill? It can have a significant impact. And if you're in a situation where you're on a shared meter with your facility, it raises the rates for your entire facility. We were lucky to be able to get separate meters for our facilities, so we only pay the demand charge on the bus chargers. We don't pay it on our base utility rates. Moving on, next slide. Talked a bit about this, that with 3 wireless chargers, that's a little over 1 megawatt of power that we have the potential to pull all at the same time. A megawatt is a lot of power. And that's the equivalent of, what, 20 houses for a year, I think. And when you're pulling it all potentially within a minute or 2, that's a big draw on the grid that's out there. For us, the cost of those chargers were about $800,000, including transformers installation costs. So wireless charging, while it is very effective, there is a significant cost to it. We are planning to have 20 vehicles in operation. So for 20 overnight chargers at our facility, it's about 1.7 megawatts to charge them simultaneously, about $350,000 in charge. So these are the slow chargers, the transformers and installation. Again, it's just a cost you have to be aware of, and having one is not good enough unless someone's going to be moving the bus from charger to charger. You actually need to have multiple chargers when you're doing them overnight. Substation capacity, huge issue. We were told it'd be $8 million to add substation out to our station in our operating base, and about $20 million to add a substation to support our downtown if we wanted to go past those limits. With 62 vehicles in the fleet, that limits our ability to electrify the entire thing without spending a huge cost. And we've been sharing this information with our legislature as they've been looking at requiring electrification, that the costs of doing this are not just the cost of the bus and the cost of the charger, it's the cost to the utility of the infrastructure to support, and it's an important piece. Next slide, please. FTA, like I said, they treat the vehicle as a 12-year useful life. They have no structure to recognize market and tech changes. When parts availability was not there, when our first battery manufacturer went bankrupt, when the second battery manufacturer went bankrupt, and when the third battery manufacturer went bankrupt, you couldn't get parts. And there was no recognition that, how do we make that happen? And it was, nope, it's your responsibility. You bought the vehicle. You have to maintain it as you would a diesel vehicle. And that's really difficult thing to do. And As I indicated, this market is changing and the technology is improving dramatically month to month and year to year in ways that are great for us. But it also means if you've invested in it, trying to keep up with it is really difficult, because the parts for your vehicles that may be 3 to 4 years old may no longer be available because they've gone past that to something else. So buying enough supply to keep your vehicles going so you can meet your 12-year life requirement is an interesting challenge. And we've made that decision on our more recent buses. We've actually purchased the parts and supplies that we think we're going to need for the life of the vehicle up front so that we can ensure availability of the parts, which again increase the cost of going forward with it. Next slide. Unanticipated. So this is a really interesting issue. Under the Government Accounting Standards Boards, 2 years ago, they have changed how you have to record your electric vehicles on your financial statements. And they now require you to account for the disposal cost of the batteries at the end of the useful life, and you have to account for replacements. So you have to estimate how long your batteries are going to last, and you have to put in your financials as an obligation the cost of replacing the batteries and then the cost of disposing them at the end of the useful life of the vehicle. Now, BYD's batteries are not toxic, so we were able to get a statement from BYD that they would buy them back from us when we retired the vehicle up to 15 years of use. And so we're able to not have to account for that. But batteries are not a small cost. The cost of the batteries on a BYD coach are $430,000. They do certify they will last the life of the bus, but that's unusual in the marketplace. Most of the rest of the manufacturers are not willing to make that pitch that they are that long. But if you have to put this onto your accounting system, you have a liability that can significantly impact your financial status, and that's a new requirement that is out there, and that's a difficult one actually. Energy management, as was mentioned, managing your demand is really a key element going forward. There is software and technology that allows you to do that. But it's separate from what the battery manufacturers provide. It's separate from what the bus manufacturers provide. And you have to work with your utility to make it work. And while the potential is pretty significant, it's something you have to be aware of going forward. Permitting. Even though these buses are mass market, you cannot install a charger on a standard permit. And the reality is there is no UL certified charger. They all have to be site certified, which means you have to have an inspection and individual approval. Your local fire marshal gets to decide whether or not you can have it. It is not something that is an automatic given going forward. And so permitting can cause huge challenges. We had a situation with our 2016 installation where the only person who was qualified to certify the chargers from UL had a heart attack and couldn't come for 5 months, and we couldn't put our buses into service while we were waiting for him to recover from his heart attack, because there was one person in the United States that was authorized to certify a charger at that time. So that I know is being addressed, but it really is a challenge as we move forward. And even today, we had to get individual certification of our chargers that we were installed here this spring. Now, it was a lot faster this time, but it's still a challenge going forward. And then trade wars. You'd be surprised how many parts on a bus are Chinese, particularly if you buy a Chinese bus. But even on a Proterra or a Gillig, there are lots of components that are made in China or made in places that we have gotten into trade wars with. And all of a sudden, you can find that you're facing a 25% tariff or a 40% tariff, or they're just banned. And that has also been a fascinating way of moving forward, as well as the Defense Act, which decided to say that certain manufacturers can't sell vehicles. FTA's tried to help with that, and we're pretty comfortable that we're going to be fine with our BYD coaches, but it is an interesting challenge to work with going forward. So our experience with electric vehicles has been that with our low utility rates in the area, it makes sense for us to go electric. We don't have natural gas available in our community because electricity has been so cheap. The pipelines are never laid here. So that's not an option for us. We have alternative fuel mandates at the state, and so electric seems to make sense for us going forward, which is why we've been pursuing it. It's incredibly popular with the public. We went to the ballot a year ago for additional sales tax authority, and as we surveyed the community, our electric vehicle programs are one of the more popular things, even in a very conservative part of our state. People do support the idea of electrification. They like the quietness of the vehicles, and they do recognize that diesels pollute. So I think even in a conservative area, people are supportive of the electrification concept. But the costs are bigger than people think, and it is not, as the manufacturers will tell you, that it's a slam dunk and you're going to save money running electric. That has not been our case at all. It's gotten close, and I think it's a good long-term investment, and we are committed to going forward with it. And I think we've worked through a lot of the problems. Our temperature issues we had with our first generation and second generation buses are really significant. Notice someone asked if CNG was available, would we have chosen CNG? I think in our situation, probably. Initially, I wanted to try electric because I think there's value to it, and I'm proud of what we've been able to move forward in the technology questions, because I think we've actually gotten a vehicle that now works in a way that can work lots of different locations, can deal with temperature. We've been really, really pleased with the results we've had, but it wasn't a slam dunk.
Thank you so much. That was, I think to say thorough would be an understatement. So thank you so much. And we're going to move on to Lisa and Sam in Chattanooga. And the floor is yours, guys. I think you're going to have to unmute, Lisa. Not yet.
Am I good?
You're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Well, both the folks before us covered all of the information that we were looking at as far as moving forward with our BYDs. What we thought we would share with everybody today is Carter's experience in the electric vehicle realm. They've been in the realm for 28 years. So we've had our downtown electric shuttle operating since 1992. And as Rich said, he is actually giving us some of his e-buses so that we can keep our fleet going. So we're gonna share more of those experiences with you versus where we're going or where what we're looking at in the future. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to point out a few things here. Carter does over 3 million passengers per year through all of our services. We operate a variety of services here. You can see that the Incline Railway in the top middle picture, we own and operate the Incline Railway, which is a major source of our revenue. And then obviously our caravan service, which is our paratransit service, and fixed route, and our shuttle. And we also operate the Chattanooga Parking Authority, which also brings in a significant amount of revenue, and also the funds from the Parking Authority utilized to fund the shuttle program. Next slide. So we have 17 fixed bus routes. We have 3 neighborhood routes, which are more like on-demand routes. We have our downtown North Shore electric shuttle, a caravan service, which is our paratransit service. We own and operate the Incline Railway, and we also handle all of the parking for the city of Chattanooga. And we have 10 park and ride locations. I didn't go into numbers, I just gave basics. Go ahead, Taylor. Talking about our fleet, and this is our downtown shuttle fleet, 8 of our oldest vehicles came from other agencies that did not and could not maintain the electric vehicle programs that they were trying to operate. Three of those were research efforts, and they're conducted by local universities. So we are still maintaining some of those vehicles. We just took some of them off the road. Our oldest vehicles are 1996, and those are still running. So the exciting thing for me, I came here about 10 years ago. I've been in the industry for 37. I've never dealt with electric vehicles, and to watch how the knowledge level and the training and everything that these folks already knew to keep these vehicles running the way they did was just amazing. And that's going to help us move forward with our electric vehicle fleet program, which is our goal is to be also all electric. So we're very excited about that. 6 buses that we recently got, which were 2013s, we purchased from eBus. eBus is the only vehicle that fit our specifications for our downtown shuttle. So we need vehicles that are 96 inches wide, which obviously nobody makes 96-inch wide vehicles any longer. So that is our issue with the BYDs and with some of the Proteras. So, you know, and Gilligs, obviously everybody's at 102 inches. So 96 inches wide is what we need in order to be able to safely operate our downtown shuttle. So we're gonna take the trolleys from Rich out in Washington, and then we're gonna hopefully get those running again, and that'll give us some newer vehicles that we can put into our fleet, and also maybe replace some of the infrastructure that we have in our current fleet. Because of our experience in the electric shuttle program and our research, we were partners with UTC. UTC, which is the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga, has a test track here in Chattanooga. And they also did testing on electric vehicles. They did CNG testing, they did propane testing. They did all of these different testings at the test track in partnership with CARTA and a lot of other agencies, Oak Ridge. And one of the things that they did test was the initial inductive charging with Wampler. So they were testing that when I started here in 2011, and they had been working on that probably since 2009 for the inductive charging. So they had a lot of experience looking at that and realizing that that was the way to go. However, it took a while for people to realize that, and obviously, as Rich said, some of the manufacturers and some of the other folks didn't really pay attention to the necessity of that versus the conductive charging. There's a lot less, well, I won't say infrastructure, but there's a lot less visible infrastructure that people see. And it also, I think, is a lot more efficient for our vehicles to do the inductive charging. Okay, Taylor. So on the funding sources, you know, pretty much the same funding sources that y'all use too is, you know, the TIGR. We received a TIGR grant, which is what we used to purchase our first 335-foot BYD all-electric vehicles for our fixed route service. We've had those in service for about 2 years now. We have funding to purchase another 2 from Gillig, and then we have funding to purchase at least 9 to 11, depending on the price, more electric vehicles, which we would have probably been pretty close to having half of those come in within the next year if COVID hadn't hit. So now our program has been pushed back a little bit due to the lovely Rona-virus, as we all call it here. We also worked with the Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation, to get funding from them as well. And then the VW mitigation money. We also will be replacing 3 of our diesel vehicles with 3 electric vehicles. So that will add to our fleet as well. The parking authority, which is what I talked about before, I think this is really important for people when they're looking at an alternative program, is to make sure that you can support your operational costs. You know, capital, you know, has been a little bit better in the last couple of years, not much, but a little bit. But the operational cost is where it comes in, as you can hear from the other folks today, that trying to cover that is where you have a problem. So we took over the parking authority, and all of the revenue that the net revenue that we get from the parking authority supports all of our operational costs for our downtown shuttle program. In 1992, when the shuttle program was designed, 3 parking garages were built by CARTA, and all of the revenue from those garages go right back into transit. So we can use them for the fixed route, we can use them for the downtown shuttle. So it's really important to have a solid stream. And I know taxes and things like that are great, but at least you have a solid stream of your own revenue coming in. The other piece that we're lucky with, and it's very rare, as you know, if you've been in the industry long enough, to see a 44 to 48% reduction of your own revenue, is that we have the incline railway. So between the incline railway and the parking authority, we net around $3 to $3.5 million a year to put towards our bottom line for operational costs. So I think the funding for your operational costs is a real important piece outside of the normal paths that you take. Okay, Taylor. As I talked about in parking, you know, we own 3 parking garages, and they have about 1,350 spaces. We manage all of the downtown on-street parking and all of the enforcement. So we take care of all of that, and that helps with our expenses. And then we have parking lots that we manage for the city as well, and we get to put all of that net revenue towards shuttle expenses. Okay. So just an idea, so you can have an idea of what a good partnership can look like. This is our Shuttle Park North Garage. On the left-hand side is the before picture, and on the right-hand side is the after picture. So we partnered with our local development corporation, River City, and they have partnered with the block. And so now we have High Point Climbing and Fitness Center in our facility. So that whole area, that whole block is the parking garage is behind all of those walls. So that's where our parking decks are, behind all of the climbing walls. And that's been a phenomenal transition into downtown. It's a great partnership. And we get a lot of resources from people parking there and utilizing the facility. So I just wanted to show you some of the unique partnerships that you could take a look at if you're trying to find some, funding sources and some support. Sorry, go ahead. Give me 1 second. This is our Shuttle Park South transfer, maintenance, parking garage, and also houses our parking authority. This is where Sam works from. This is where we keep all of our downtown shuttles. And this is where all of our maintenance is done down here in this facility. It's a central location, obviously, for the shuttle program itself. And then our fixed route vehicles also utilize the front side to do transfers. We do not have a central transfer station. We're still working on that for our fixed routes. But this is one of the ones that we utilize on a daily basis. Next. This is one of the 1996 ABS shuttle buses that we still have and that Sam and his team keep operating. They look amazing. This picture was from 2013 and they still look the same. They're phenomenal as far as how well they're taken care of, and that they run every day. Sometimes obviously Sam's going to get into the details that y'all want to hear more about, more than I can talk about it as far as battery maintenance and the programs. But they're loved by the downtown community, and people, especially tourists, really love taking them. So I just wanted you to have a picture of what our shuttles look like and why we were looking at the 96-inch wide shuttles. Okay, next. So these are our electric vehicles currently. We have 5 1996 ABS, and they're lead acid. We have 3 2004 ABS, and those are lead acid. We have 6 2013 e-buses, which are lithium ion, 3 BYD 35-foot transit, which are lithium ion. We have 8 35 Gillig hybrids, which are lithium ion. And then we are looking to purchase, BYD has 4 96-inch wide, 30-foot all electric vehicles that we're looking to purchase those as well for our downtown shuttle so that we can replace some of our older vehicles. Okay. Personnel. This is another piece that I didn't see anybody talk about, and I know this has been an issue for us. This is part of the lessons learned. It's really important that you make sure that your operator and your maintenance folks are trained, which is very difficult to do in the electric vehicle arena because there's not a lot of training out there for them. A lot of these manufacturers who are putting these vehicles out do not have a great training program. I know they're working on it because it's new for them as well, but we've had to pretty much do our own training in-house and then have those, like Sam, train the other mechanics so that they know what they're looking at, because obviously this is a dangerous area, and if you're not safe and you're not sure what you're looking at, then you're going to run into a problem. I can't emphasize this enough, probably over anything else that we do, to make sure that they know what they need to do, and that it's a constant training, and you almost have to develop it yourself, which is very difficult to do. So I've been pushing with Gillig and anybody else that I can talk to who's getting into the electric vehicle arena to make sure that they look at training and providing training and a good training program, not just looking at the manual and talking through the manual, but on site and can physically show the folks what they need to do so that we can take care of the vehicles and we can be safe doing it. The operators are obviously another key. If you don't have an operator who knows how to handle the vehicle, they can kill your mileage and they can kill your kilowatt hours. They can just run it right down if they don't know how to drive that vehicle. So that's another piece that's really important, to make sure they understand why they need to operate the vehicle in such a manner, and what happens if they don't. So I know you can't always make sure that happens, but at least if they have the tools and they know what they're supposed to do, that's a piece that we struggle with a lot. Most of the folks recognize it. Some of the folks still we have to deal with. And then, as I said with Sam's like, I call him a champion trainer. He's our foreman for our electric vehicle program, but he's been in electric vehicles for 15 years. He's been with Carter for 17 years. So he's very knowledgeable in this area. So he shares his knowledge with others so that we can make sure that it's transferred, and if Sam decides to retire, he doesn't take it with him. Next. Again, I'll just be quick with this. It's the vendor support and training. We've been doing this for 28 years. And again, it's our lessons learned have been our lessons learned. Nobody's really been helpful. As Rich said, the e-bus folks have gone out of business. They've been in and out of business since I've been here 11 years. So, and probably prior to that. So their support has been negligible. And I, you know, I don't have an issue saying that. I've said it to them, so I don't have a problem saying that. And you have to have somebody in-house, because you never know what you're going to get from some of the vendors as far as support goes and what their education level is, because this is all new for everybody. So you have to make sure you have an in-house champion who can stay on them, can stay strong with the information, make sure they understand what we want, and then demand what we want from them as well. We need more on-site visits from technical support and training teams, not just the sales folks. You know, they're great, but you know, they're not the ones that are going to help us every day. Next. This is Sam's area. I'm going to let Sam take over now. He's going to talk about some of the maintenance issues that he's learned over the years.
Okay. Never shortcut battery maintenance. More is better in our experience, especially since we ran some of the older lead acid packs. We have people that walk around and actually monitor our buses while they're charging to see that they're still charging and make sure that what's on the screen that you see information-wise is what it should be. Frequent and preventive maintenance. We have 4 levels of PMs, A, B, C, D. We do our PMs every 2,000 miles on our small buses. You know, I couldn't emphasize that more. Confirm that the component is really the issue. Trust but verify. You know, some of you people that have actually worked in the shop know that as these vehicles age, things change. So, you know, if you've got another bus there that you can swap a component on and see if it's still acting the same way or not, that's something you need to teach your guys how to do or to do. And then there's the moving into the higher voltage traction batteries now that we have to have this personal EMP equipment or EPM equipment to guard anybody from electrical shock. I mean, our older buses are 320 volts. When we break the packs on either side, we cut that in half. So there's really not much of a danger there. And the way our connectors are set up, you can't touch anything that's going to electrocute you. But this newer stuff, you know, the voltage is getting higher. It's getting kind of scary. All right, next.
Thank you guys so much. That was fantastic. While you guys were presenting, the Mountain Lion team and Rich have been hard at work answering questions. So I'm actually just going to throw out questions to y'all at Chattanooga. Can you talk a little bit about your energy capacity and how it has been versus what was promised by the manufacturer? What has been your experience with that?
Well, for us, I mean, you have to remember the downtown shuttle fleet is all electric and has always been all electric. So right now, we just started utilizing our 35-foot BYD vehicles, and we get, I wrote that down, hang on. So our average, if you look at what we get miles per kilowatt hour, we get 0.778 miles per kilowatt hour, in which compares when you run it through we have a calculator that we use, it compares to 26 miles per gallon for diesel. So, you know, we really are getting more bang for our buck with the 3 BYDs that we have. But we have had, as Rich said, we have had some issues with those. We got those when they decided to build a new plant in California. So they were a little bit late getting to us. And then we had some issues with those. So they were probably a good year before we got to put them on the road. As far as that goes, we haven't had enough experience yet to run a lot of, I guess you would say, testing or algorithms. We are working with our local electric folks, EPB, to see if they can work with us to give us a better deal. They're being a little stubborn about that, but our electricity costs are very low here. For our electric shuttles, it's 15 cents a kilowatt hour, so it's very low for us as it was. I think Rich said his area was low as well. So I apologize, I didn't put all of that information together. I was looking more towards what we were doing with the electric shuttle fleet. So if you have more questions on that, I'd be more than happy to send you information if you let Taylor know.
Awesome, and please do. And we're gonna do one final question, and this is for the 3 of you from Leslie. Do the 3 agencies that presented, so the 3 of you guys, all perform their own maintenance, or do they have contractors operating their service? So let's start with Corey and Vince, then we'll go to Rich, and then Chattanooga.
Yeah, we do all of our own maintenance. Our team was trained. They received quite a bit of training, and so all maintenance is done in-house.
And we're the same way. We do all our maintenance in-house. We've trained our individuals. We actually, about 6 years ago, created a maintenance trainer position in the shop because we could see we were going to be going to an all-electric fleet, and that was going to challenge some of the folks how we move forward. And as has been a time-honored technique with maintenance, we hired away one of our maintenance techs from BYD to actually work for us, and that helped us a lot getting reliability on the fleet. But it's, once we get it, it's not. I mean, it's definitely different. But once you get it, it seems to work well. And our staff really like the electric buses. They've as we finally got a product that works, which I think where we're at now, we're quite comfortable with the technology.
And we do all of our own maintenance in-house as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And I will go through the questions again, and anything that we didn't answer, I will make sure that I will pass along to the presenters and you guys will all get answers. So as most of you may have seen, I threw some resources in the chat box, and we have some on the screen here. In the chat box, I wanted to make sure to include, obviously, the FTA's No Low Emission Bus Program, as well as the recent recipients. We've also included some of our analysis on the recently passed HR2, which is the House of Representatives infrastructure bill, along with specifically the INVEST Act. And this, the INVEST Act actually increases funding for low-no. So I wanted to make sure everybody had that. On the screen, as most of you hopefully know, we do a bi-weekly newsletter called Fast Mail and also a monthly member newsletter. If you guys aren't receiving that, please make sure to let me know. We also have a blog that is regularly updated by myself and a bunch of people on CTA staff about topics that we think members might be interested in. And finally, we have a webpage dedicated to SUN. So we are regularly updating that for everything that might be relevant to our SUN members. I also wanted to point out that NCAT, the National Center for Applied Transit Technology, has a number of resources coming up this fall on electric buses. So definitely keep an eye out for their website and their newsletter. Finally, thank you to everybody that came. Huge thank you to the presenters. I can't thank you all enough. And we have about a 17-minute break, if my math is correct. At 4 p.m., we have organized a virtual tour with Metro Bus in St. Cloud of their mobile travel training center. So it's a way to show their customers how to take advantage of their services. So L'Oreal threw that link in the chat box, and we can't wait to see you guys soon. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.